Good evening and welcome to DS Radio. That's Domination and Submission Radio. My name is Mike Makai and I'm your host with the most DS, BDSM, kink, and fetish talk on Blog Talk Radio. Our topic tonight is the Pseudo-sub Brat. At what point does a Brat Submissive become a Pseudo-submissive? And we address this topic at length in my first book, Domination and Submission, the BDSM Relationship Handbook, which is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and other fine booksellers out there. If you've not read the book, I highly recommend it. I'm kind of biased. I wrote it, but I think that it can definitely open your eyes to a lot of issues surrounding this particular topic. Again, we're talking about Brat Submissives and Pseudo-subs, which in the book are really two different types of submissive, but there's a process that allows someone to kind of move from one category to the other. So at what point does a Brat Submissive become a Pseudo-sub Submissive? I think that's going to be an interesting topic tonight. I am alone in the studio tonight. My usual co-host, Little Red, has to do that work thing that people seem to be all interested in these days. Hopefully, she'll be back with us next week for another episode of the show. If you're interested in calling into the show, then please do. The number to call is 347-857-1862. Again, 347-857-1862. You can call that number to ask a question, make a comment, or if you want to just call in and listen to the show, you can do that as well. It's a great way to keep up with what we're doing, even if you're not near a computer or a smartphone. All right, so let me tell you how you can participate in this show, even if you don't want to call in and tell us what you think. You can visit our website at domination-submission.com. That's domination-submission.com. And there you can find our links to social media such as Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, LinkedIn, Google+, whatever. So add me there. I like getting new friends and followers. It tells me that there are people out there paying attention, and it gives me a reason to get out of bed in the morning. I'd also point you to the chat room at the bottom of your screen. If you're listening to us on Blog Talk Radio, there's a chat room. Just scroll down. You should see it. If you're logged in, you have a free account at Blog Talk Radio, then you're able to chat in that chat room, ask your question there, and I'll try and get the answer to your question or comment on the air. All right, so I did mention my book. The book is doing quite well. I am in the middle of writing my next volume in the series, and it is due out next month sometime. And I'll tell you, this is kind of why I got onto this topic of the Pseudo-sub Brat Submissives, because I was writing about a related topic in this book, which is about the Warrior Princess Submissive. The Warrior Princess Submissive, for those of you who haven't been following my writings or my blogging or my other promotional efforts, the Warrior Princess Submissive is kind of a stealth submissive. She's a submissive that nobody thinks is a submissive. Think Xena, the Warrior Princess, who's out there, fighting the good fight, slaying dragons, crusading against evil. Everyone thinks that she is a badass dominant, but when she goes home at night and she takes off her sword and her shield and settles in for the evening, she kneels at the feet of her master, who in the original series originally was Hercules, believe it or not. She was a character in a TV show called Hercules, The Legendary Journeys, and she was only supposed to appear in 3 of those episodes, and the producers supposedly killed her off after 3 episodes. But she proved to be so popular with the audience that they had to bring her back. And so they brought her back this time, not as Hercules' nemesis. Actually, she was Hercules' enemy in the first 3 episodes of that show. But they brought her back as a heroine in her own right, in her own series, and paired her up with a sidekick named Gabrielle. And she turned out to be one of the most popular female characters on television. And so this is one of the first things I thought about when I started thinking about what kind of submissive is a good match for that white knight dominant that I wrote about in my first book. So why am I taking the scenic route here and telling you all of this? It's because I'm trying to explain to you the thought process that brought me to tonight's topic, because tonight's topic came about when I started looking at how the Warrior Princess differentiates herself from some of the other submissive categories out there. And the two types of submissives that she probably most closely resembles were the acolyte and the brat. Now, the reason is the acolyte and the brat are probably have the strongest, most forceful characters of the entire roster of submissives that I wrote about in my first book. And there are a lot of people who would say that, your warrior princess is not that different from, say, an acolyte who's out there fighting for her beliefs, or that brat who's out there fighting just to fight, but she's a fighter, so she's a fighter, she must be a warrior as well. Well, there are different types of fighters, and the more I looked at it, the more I realized that the differences were the most stark between the warrior princess and the brat. But most of the things that I had to say about the brats weren't really about the good brats. There are good brats and there are not so good brats. And the difference is pretty stark even within that category. But most of the things that I thought of in terms of negatives when it came to brats really didn't apply to brats specifically, but to those brats that had gone over the line and really passed over into pseudo-sub territory. Essentially had gone from being a real submissive who was a brat to being a phony submissive who uses being a brat as an excuse for being a phony submissive. I hope you're following me there. So I made sure that I used the proper terminology in the manuscript that I'm working on now, which is the pseudo-sub brat. This is not a real submissive, to be perfectly honest with you. It's really not a real brat, to be perfectly honest with you. But I thought that it deserved a little bit of attention, and so we're talking about that tonight. When does a brat become a pseudo-sub brat? Because I'm sure that there are a lot of you out there listening who may be submissives and have strong, forceful personalities, who are powerful in your own way, whether it is vocational or skill-based or intellectual or emotionally strong or whatever, but you have some sort of innate strength that identifies you as a warrior of some sort. The question is, what is the fight you're fighting? Who are you fighting, and why are you fighting? I mean, being a fighter is a good thing, as far as I'm concerned. I'm writing an entire book about submissives who are out there fighting the good fight. It's a beautiful thing to watch. So what we really want to talk about here, though, is at what point does the fight become a hindrance? At what point does it become a ball and chain or an anchor that stops you from being a good submissive or a submissive at all? So Kaylee in our chat room says bratting equals foreplay, huh? All right. Well, sometimes it does. Sometimes it really does. But sometimes even foreplay can go a little too far. So we're going to talk about what sort of circumstances could cause someone to not necessarily be a good brat submissive. And there are good brat submissives. They're not particularly my cup of tea, but they are a legitimate classification of submissive. And unfortunately, they've been really misunderstood and mischaracterized by people in and out of lifestyle. Let's start with a definition of what is a brat submissive. And the best definition that I can give you, and this is right out of my book, is a brat submissive is someone who's generally well-behaved, but they have made teasing and limited sorts of defiance and misbehavior and disobedience an integral part of their DS relationship dynamic. Making all of those forms of defiance or teasing or misbehaviors an integral part of your relationship is not a bad thing, as long as everyone involved consents to it. In other words, if you're a submissive who considers herself a brat and you like to tease your dominant, as long as your dominant thinks that's all right, then it's all right. If your dominant doesn't think it's all right, then you have kind of stepped beyond the limits of consent. He's not consenting to that kind of treatment, and therefore you have gone over the line. At that point, you're not just a brat, you're a pseudo-sub brat. All right? If you cannot control this urge, this compulsion to act out, to push beyond the boundaries of what your dominant thinks is appropriate, then this is a behavior that needs to be addressed in your relationship, and it needs to be brought out into the open, because there are just so many people out there who are afraid to even address this. And there are a lot of people, unfortunately, who use the notion that they are a brat to excuse any kind of behavior. And I have, unfortunately, been involved with certain people who feel that this is the universal excuse for any misbehavior. Well, I'm a brat. That only goes so far. And there's also a misconception out there that a brat only misbehaves and is rude or is provocative to people other than her dominant. So in other words, the general misconception is that a brat is someone who is perfectly behaved with her dominant and within her DS relationship dynamic, but she's out there being bratty to everyone else. She's out there being provocative and poking and teasing and being generally a pain in the neck to everyone around them. Well, personally, I've never seen that. I don't think that anybody is capable of being perfectly behaved in one scenario with her dominant and then just so poorly behaved everywhere else. I believe that that's kind of a myth, probably a very carefully constructed facade that doesn't hold up to close scrutiny. And essentially, I think that it just doesn't exist that way. Typically, if someone misbehaves, they misbehave everywhere. And if they don't, they don't. I mean, it's pretty simple. Now, what you do see quite often is a dominant who will whitewash the behavior of his or her submissive, because to admit that you have a submissive that you can't control is kind of like admitting that you're a parent with children you can't control. It just reflects very badly on you. And so, for the most part, even when you have a submissive who is completely acting out of bounds, out of control, hard to handle, impossible to discipline, incapable of exercising self-discipline, when those things happen, very often the dominant will be complicit in covering it up, not letting anybody know that this is going on. And so this misconception that she must be fine at home, but she's just acting out everywhere else, tends to get perpetuated under those kinds of circumstances. So just a couple reasons why you might not be fully aware of how that dynamic actually works in the real world. And yeah, Lady Engineer in the chat room says it sounds like grounds to end the relationship. Well, it definitely is. Unfortunately, there are just way too many people out there who don't recognize the problem for what it is. Let's say, for example, and this is something that I have seen just in the last few days, when there is a problem with a submissive of any sort, the first impulse of some people is to say, well, there's no such thing as a bad submissive, just bad dominance. If the submissive is acting out, it's really the dominant's fault because it's his job to control that. Well, maybe and maybe not, because guess what? The entire basis of a DS relationship is consent. And if a submissive does not consent to being trained or corrected or guided or chastised or disciplined, then guess what? She's not going to be. And the best dominant in the world cannot fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed. But unfortunately, there's a lot of bumper sticker thinking out there, and that bumper sticker thinking allows people to write off and excuse and ignore what the real issues are in some of these relationships. So, yes, there are bad submissives. Not everything can be fixed. Not every dominant is capable of getting past that inability of some people to truly submit. And you can't make someone submit. You have to make them want to submit. And so a true sub has submitted and has, with the permission of her dominant, worked out certain types of behaviors which are allowable, which are acceptable, in fact might even be enjoyable to the dominant. Maybe he likes to be teased. Maybe he likes to have to put you over his knee every once in a while for a playful spanking or something like that. It works for a lot of people. It doesn't work for me, but it works for a lot of people. Personally, I don't like to be teased. And personally, if I think you're a bad submissive, I won't punish you in the way that others might. I tend to believe that good girls get spankings, bad girls just get ignored. A brat doesn't do very well in my environment, but there are people out there who really enjoy that sort of thing, and more power to them. If it's something that they mutually agree upon, mutually consent to, and enjoy, then definitely go for it. I think it's a great thing. Again, we're going to go now to what happens when somebody goes over that line. If somebody doesn't actually get the consent of her dominant to be a brat, if somebody pushes these things much further than they need to go, well, how do you know that you've crossed the line? How do you know that you have become what I call in my book a pseudo-sub? In other words, a phony sub. And, I did write about a lot of the clues that you could look for. And we're going to go over some of those. First, let me just say that most of the people who fall into this category of pseudo-submissive, they don't know that they're a pseudo-submissive. It's not as if they just realize at some point in their life that they're not really submissive, but they're just going to pretend to be one anyway. That's not how it works. These people are genuinely convinced that they are submissives, most of them. The problem is that they have confused being a bottom with being a submissive. Now remember, DS and BDSM are not the same thing. DS is a relationship dynamic. It's who you are. So DS literally stands for dominant submissive, or dominance and submission. BDSM is what you do. It's an activity: bondage, discipline, sadism, masochism. Now, in that realm, you have tops and bottoms. So in a DS relationship, you can be a dominant or a submissive. In a BDSM activity, which might just be for tonight, or might be just for the next 10 minutes, you could be a top or a bottom. Just because you're top doesn't make you a dominant, and just because you're bottom doesn't make you a submissive. And there are dominants who can bottom. There are submissives who can top. These are two different things. You can be both simultaneously, or one or the other. Just keep that in mind. I believe that confusion on these terms is responsible for about 75% of all of the problems in this lifestyle. Because even people who've been in the lifestyle their entire lives can sometimes misunderstand this, and this misunderstanding can lead to just some horrible problems in relationships. So, again, a lot of the people who we would classify as pseudo-subs are really bottoms who think they're submissives, who honestly and truly think that because they like to be spanked, they like to be tied up, they like to be put into all sorts of bottoming activities, that they enjoy these things, that they must be a submissive. And that's not necessarily the case at all. So do keep that in mind, because it's really, really sad when you see somebody making big decisions in their lives, decisions about who will be their life partners, who they're going to marry, who they play with, how they prioritize the people and the lovers in their lives and that sort of thing, based on completely wrong information. It's very sad, and it kind of breaks my heart when I see it happening. And so this is a dead horse that I continue to beat, just because I understand how much damage it can do in people's lives if they don't recognize how badly that can go wrong. All right, so let's talk about some of the warning signs, those yellow flags, maybe even those red flags that tell you that somebody has stepped over the line into pseudo-sub territory. The first one that I'm going to give you is one of my personal favorites, and that is that the pseudo-sub just loves following her dominant's instructions, as long as those instructions already coincide with what she wanted to do in the first place. Now, you know what I'm talking about here. If you're telling somebody that you need to, wear something sexy for me on Saturday night, that's great. That's what she wanted to do anyway, so she enjoys following those instructions. But when you tell her you need to wear combat boots and mow my lawn, suddenly your instructions are not so fun to follow. All right, so this is a big yellow flag, and it's one that I have used many times to weed out some of the pseudo-subs, because I've had in the course of my lifetime, I've had a lot of people approach me and ask me to mentor them, to train them, to teach them, to show them more about the lifestyle. And I usually ask them, well, what is it you want to learn? Why do you want to learn it? How badly do you want to learn it? What is your end goal? Where do you see yourself going with all of this? Do you really understand the implications of what you are proposing here? And very often they don't. And very often they will do their very best to convince me that they're serious, very serious about embarking on this path and having me teach them what they want to know about the lifestyle. And it usually ends up sounding something like, I will do anything. I will do anything to convince you that, I'm serious about this. To which I would usually reply, do you have a lawnmower? And there's usually a very awkward silence there because, they're just so used to believing that the first thing out of my mouth is going to be something sexual or something, kinky. And no, I like throwing out, do you have a lawnmower? Because that immediately gets them thinking, you know what, I just might have you out there mowing my lawn and edging my sidewalk and, putting out grass seed and weed killer or something. Because this is the first test of whether or not somebody will literally do anything, or if what they mean by I'll do anything means I'll do anything as long as it's something I already wanted to do anyway. And bead lover, I like my lawn cut very short. Thank you very much. So, anyway, but this is one of your first warning signs. One of the other things that I do is when people say, hey, I'll do anything for you, I'll say, all right, sing me a song. And again, there's usually a very long, awkward silence there while they contemplate the notion that they just might have to do something that they don't want to do, that they're uncomfortable doing, that they might actually have to embarrass themselves a little bit or do something that they're just not real comfortable with. So, again, this is my first yellow flag that I look for in any trainee or anybody who's kind of new to the lifestyle, is I ask them, you willing to mow my lawn? Are you going to sing me a song? I just don't really care about the lawn. I don't really care about the song. But what I want to know is, are they serious when they say that they will follow instructions? Not just the ones that they want to follow, but any instructions. That's a critical standard that just about anybody should have to be willing to meet if they're going to be a submissive in this lifestyle. All right, we have a lot of other yellow flags we're going to look for, but first we're going to take a little musical break. We'll be back in about 2 minutes. You've been listening to DS Radio. My name is Mike Makai. I'm the author of Domination and Submission, the BDSM Relationship Handbook. I'm so confused. This is what I sound like when I'm unmedicated, by the way. I'm usually riddled with ADD. I ran out of meds this morning, and so I'm completely and 100% unmedicated. And so if I come back pinging off the walls talking about something totally unrelated, please forgive me. We'll be back in about 2 minutes. And we are back. You're listening to DS Radio. I am unmedicated Mike Makai, and we are talking about the Pseudo-sub Brat. And to be honest, in my first book, I did not classify anyone. I didn't come up with a classification called the Pseudo-sub Brat. There are two classifications in my book, the Brat and the Pseudo-sub. But it just occurred to me today that there are people who kind of make that transition from one category to the other relatively easily. And I think it's up to the rest of us to kind of recognize when somebody has made that transition and stay as far away from that person as possible. And for good reason. A pseudo-sub can cause a crap load of heartache and hassle and drama in the lives of everyone around her. And I use the word her. I'm not being a gender bigot here. It could be a guy as well. I just my experience has been that the ladies outnumber the males about 10 to 1 when it comes to submissives in this lifestyle. And so I am simply, for the sake of convenience, using the female gender pronoun because it is probably a reflection of the most common situation out there, which is it will most often be a woman. So, and in my particular case, it is almost always a woman. I have had very, very few male submissives in my life, and for not very long, and not very successfully. So, just turns out I just happen to love women. So, oh well. Okay, so let's talk about some of the other yellow flags, for that matter, red flags, that you have to look out for when we're talking about pseudo-sub brats. And again, a pseudo-sub brat is almost an oxymoron because a brat is a submissive, a pseudo-sub is not. So we're kind of combining two categories in a way that doesn't really make a whole lot of logical sense, but I think that it tells you a lot about that particular person, that they use the fact that they were or consider themselves a brat as an excuse to get away with a lot of stuff. All right, so we talked about how a pseudo-sub just loves following instructions unless those instructions don't happen to coincide with what she wanted to do anyway. Again, let's talk a little bit more about some of the other yellow flags. The pseudo-sub thinks it's critical to get your opinion on just about everything, but not on some of the most important things. And by this I mean that she's not consistently seeking guidance from her dominant. And this is a big deal, and this is actually a big enough deal that it has caused problems in my life. Somebody who asks you, during the course of the day what color underwear she should wear, what kind of soup she should order at the restaurant, where she should, what color dress she should wear, whether these shoes go with these pants, but then forgets to mention that she bought a car today. That is something that you got to watch out for. I mean, this is a very clear indicator that it's the process, and a process that is applied in a very inconsistent way, that gives her the pleasure, but not the actual goal. The actual goal should be that she is seeking the dominant's guidance and opinion in everything. The process says that she seeks it out when it's convenient or when it's fun, but not when it isn't. So if it's something that she wants to do but she thinks you might not want to let her do, suddenly she forgets to seek your approval or opinion on it. All right, one of the other flags that you might want to look at is that she tends to think that it is her job to make you a better dominant. But somehow there's no reciprocity there. It's not your job to make her a better submissive. If you try to do this, you are just being a mean person. All right. If you try to recognize the mistakes that she makes, or the missteps, or the wrong-headedness about certain things that she does, she just sees this as not being compassionate, not recognizing that she's just having an off day or a bad mood, or that she's just being a brat. And you knew that she was a brat to begin with, so why are you bugging her about this? So, again, this is another example of inconsistency there, because she never seems to think it's a problem to improve you as her dominant. She just doesn't want you to improve her as a submissive. Now, along those same lines, a pseudo-sub is absolutely never wrong. She's not wrong. She's just learning how not to do things. She's just picking up life's lessons the hard way. She's just finding her own path, and she doesn't need you to tell her that she's on the wrong path. She'll figure it out herself sooner or later. All right. It doesn't matter that anyone with half a brain can see that she's walking into a train tunnel and there's an oncoming train at the other end of it. She doesn't want to hear this. She wants to find out for herself. All right. This is a sure sign of a pseudo-sub. Now, this kind of brings up a topic that I have made an issue in my book, and I also make an issue in conversations everywhere with everyone all the time. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine. That's the issue of trust. A lot of people think trust is simply a word that means that you are confident that somebody is not going to betray you. In other words, out there in the vanilla world, somebody says, "I trust my husband," to mean that I trust him not to run away with some floozy. Or somebody says, "I trust my wife," to mean I trust her not to sleep around. All right. Trust has a very specific meaning out there in the vanilla world, but it's not what we mean in the DS world. In the DS world, when somebody says, "I trust you," it really means I trust whatever you say to be the truth. I trust what you say to be in my best interests. I trust you to handle this issue. Are you tracking with me here now? It doesn't mean I trust you not to lie to me. It means I trust you to do the right thing. I trust you to take care of me. I trust you to keep my best interests at the forefront. All right. Now, why am I even bringing this up? Because we were just talking about how a pseudo-sub is never wrong. Well, yes, she is sometimes. And guess what? So are we, dominants, wrong sometimes. But that's not the point. The point isn't whether someone's right or wrong. The point is, have you committed to trusting that what I say as a dominant is in your best interests? When I say that path is leading towards an oncoming train, and I really don't want to stand here and watch a train wreck, please get off that path. You either trust what I say or you don't. It doesn't really matter whether I'm right or wrong. It doesn't really matter whether you're right or wrong. In this particular case, the idea is that you trust me, and we are right or wrong together, but we're on the same path, going in the same direction with the same goal in mind. All right. So sometimes it's not that important who's right and who's wrong, and saying "I told you so" just makes it worse. But the issue of trust is tantamount in a DS relationship. You either trust your partner or you don't. And when you're submissive, trusting your dominant means a hell of a lot more than just saying, "Well, I trust him not to betray me." Trusting your dominant means when your dominant says, "Don't worry about that," then you shouldn't worry about it. When he says you should worry about something, then you should worry about it. When your dominant says you're on the wrong path, you need to take that seriously. You don't need to argue and justify and prove him right or wrong or whatever. It's a whole lot of wasted energy there. Again, whether someone is actually right or wrong is really kind of irrelevant there, because if you can't have that trust, that faith in your partner in both directions, then the rest of it is pretty immaterial. It's kind of a waste of time. You're spinning your wheels. All right, so let's see. A pseudo-sub often cares less about her actual relationship with her dominant than she does with what others think about her relationship. And this is kind of important, too. I really do find this to be particularly aggravating. And you see it all the time, particularly in novice submissives, or novice pseudo-submissives. Again, sometimes there's a fine line. You really don't know if somebody is a real submissive or a pseudo-submissive. And that's why you spend a lot of time playing Sherlock Holmes and looking for clues. And this is one of your first clues right here. The submissive cares more about what everyone on Facebook thinks about her relationship than she cares about what her partner thinks about the relationship. The pseudo-sub cares more about the collar around her neck than the dynamic that exists between the two of you. The pseudo-sub is all about the collaring ceremony, what the collar actually represents to the two of you. And I could go on and on and on, but what it really boils down to is caring more about what other people think about the relationship. The relationship becomes a status symbol. The relationship becomes a fun activity. It's kind of like these people who, out there in the vanilla world, who spend months and months and months planning their wedding ceremony, but spend about 5 minutes figuring out who it was they were going to marry. All right? This is what I'm talking about. These are the same people who spend, weeks deciding on a wedding dress, but doesn't give a moment's thought to whether she really believes what she says in her wedding vows. These are the same people who become pseudo-subs. They care about what everyone thinks. They care about the external, fluff that really doesn't mean anything. A collar in this lifestyle is a mindset. It is a symbol of your mutual commitment. It has nothing to do with what's actually around your neck. There may not even be anything actually around your neck, but that doesn't mean you're not collared. There might not be a wedding ring on your finger, but that doesn't mean you're not married. But for some people, it's all about the ring on their finger or the collar around their neck. And that's usually a big sign of a pseudo-sub. All right. Something else that a pseudo-sub does and that we have to be aware of, at least I have to be aware of as a dominant, is that a pseudo-sub thinks that the rules only apply to all those other submissives. She's special. You know who I'm talking about. There are lots of people out there who believe that the rules that everyone else have to follow are for the peasants, for the riffraff, for all those other people. She's special. We love each other, so there's no possible way that you're going to, send me packing because I don't pay attention to the rules. This is a fatal error that a lot of people don't even realize they're making while they're doing it. Rules exist for a reason, and that reason is that it keeps a relationship on an even keel. Anyone who decides that they're special and the rules don't apply to them run the risk of running that relationship off the tracks. I just mixed my metaphors, didn't I? Even keel, sailboat, tracks, train. This is what happens when I'm unmedicated. Anyway, a pseudo-sub thinks she's special. She thinks that she can do whatever the hell she wants, but because you love her, you won't do anything about it. Fatal mistake. Big mistake. Don't ever make that mistake yourself in your relationships. If there are rules in your relationship, follow them. If there are no rules in your relationship, maybe you might want to come up with some. Regardless, make sure that the rules that you come up with make sense to everyone involved. Make sure that they are followable. Make sure that they are verifiable. Make sure that they're not such a hassle that everyone just ignores them, including your dominant. And I have seen this happen too. I have seen a submissive beg and cajole and maneuver and manipulate her dominant into giving her rules. I need rules, I need rules, I need rules. Okay, so he goes out and he finds rules. He looks on the internet and he looks them up. And he asks his friends, oh, what kind of rules should I give her? Because, obviously they're really important. If you can't dream them up, you have to ask your friends for the rules, right? But this is what they do. They come up with rules. And most of the time they're just silly rules. And even the ones that make sense, they're rules that are just unenforceable. Like, gee, whenever I'm out of town, you have to wear a chastity belt. Okay, how are you going to know if she's wearing the chastity belt if you're out of town? You see what I'm saying? This is kind of silly. Coming up with rules that you can't enforce is a sure ticket to being not taken seriously. All right? So if you're going to have rules, make sure they make sense. Make sure they're enforceable. Make sure that you're willing to expend the energy that it takes to enforce the rules. If you tell somebody that they have to wear purple panties every Thursday, you damn well better be there every Thursday and looking up that skirt to see if she's wearing purple panties. Because if you're not, guess what? You have just made yourself a laughingstock. That's all you've done. So make sure it makes sense. Make sure that you are willing to expend that energy to enforce whatever silly rules you come up with. And I'm not saying all rules are silly. I have my own rules. But they're not particularly complicated, and they're not particularly hard to enforce, and there's a reason for it. Not just because somebody told me I had to have rules. Not just because I went out on the internet and found some cookie-cutter list of rules that some other 13-year-old wannabe dominant came up with. My rules make sense to me. They make sense to my submissives, and they're there for a damn good reason. All right, so a pseudo-sub thinks she's special. Rules are for other people. Wrong answer. Okay, so what's another yellow flag that you might want to look for that tells you that somebody is a pseudo-sub? How about this one? A pseudo-sub tells all the other submissives, my master is the best master in the whole wide world. Yet at the very same time, she tells him, why can't you be like other dominants? Why can't you be like my last master? Why aren't you more compassionate? Why aren't you more understanding? Why can't you just see I'm being a brat? I'm just being a brat. This is who I am. Why don't you make some allowance for that? Now, I don't know about you, but I seem to think there's a bit of a disconnect between telling everybody else that my master is the best master in the whole wide world and telling your master he's sucking. He needs to change. He needs to get better. He needs to improve to meet your standards. No, not so much. And again, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the show, which is she seems to think that it's her job to make you a better dominant. But at the same time, it's not your job to make her a better submissive. Or she pays lip service to the concept that it is your job, but she doesn't actually follow through and improves based on the things that you tell her. All right, so here's another yellow flag, and that is a pseudo-sub thinks that having a dominant will magically fix whatever is wrong with her. I have seen this more times than I can count. It is one of the most heartbreaking and frustrating misconceptions out there. It is, unfortunately, one of the things that draws people into the lifestyle. There are just so many vanilla people out there who have some serious baggage of some sort. Maybe it is an incident of abuse in their past. Maybe it is an inability to feel intimacy. Maybe it is an extreme form of masochism or sadism or whatever the heck it is. I mean, there are just lots of little things out there. Every one of us has some kind of baggage that we carry with us. And what generally happens is they come across the lifestyle. They read a book. They come across an internet website, or a friend introduces them to the lifestyle. And the very first thing that comes to their mind is, this is the answer. This is what will fix me. Having a dominant will fix this problem. It will get me over this hump. It will somehow magically make me a whole person again. And guess what? It won't. It probably won't. But I will admit that sometimes there are things that can be accomplished through a healthy DS relationship, but it's not going to magically wave a wand and fix all of your problems. If anything, developing the kind of trust that is absolutely necessary in a DS relationship can solve a lot of problems. I'll be the first one to admit that. If your problem is that you worry too much about things, then sometimes trusting me to take care of that problem will help you get over that worry. If your problem is feeling intimacy with your partner, then trusting me will help you get over that as well. There's just a lot of things that can be helped by developing a close and abiding trust in your partner. That's not to say that every DS relationship is going to result in a close and abiding trust with your partner. So these really are two separate issues. And if you develop that kind of trust in your partner, that is a good thing. But it's not going to be a given that you'll find it in every relationship. Okay, so let's take a look again at what another yellow flag might be, and that is what we call in the lifestyle the one true way. Okay, one true way. The novice submissive generally is so excited about discovering the lifestyle that she believes that everything that she reads on the internet must be true. That if it isn't in the dominant's creed or the submissive's creed or the 18 things that a dominant must do or the 14 things that a submissive must do, if it's not there, if it's not on Tumblr, it must be wrong. It was on Tumblr, it must be true. This is usually a big yellow flag that tells you that this person is not using their common sense. It has an unrealistic view, an unrealistic perspective of what the lifestyle really means. This is kind of indicative of that bumper sticker mentality that we were talking about earlier in the show. So, again, if you see or you hear or you come across somebody who has that mentality that, if it was on Tumblr, it must be true, this is a yellow flag that you might want to pay attention to. And, of course, there's that yellow flag that says, somebody who's been tied up 100 different ways or spanked in 15 different languages, that makes her a professional submissive, somebody who really knows what she's doing. Of course, because everyone knows that being tied up takes a great deal of skill, right? So, again, confusing being a bottom with being a submissive is one of the biggest mistakes you will see again and again and again. They are two completely different things. Yes, there is a lot of overlap, but one does not equate to the other. Right? Now, one of the things that I particularly like, and this is one that usually stands out almost from the very first in an interview. When you interview somebody as a prospective submissive or prospective dominant or whatever, you ask lots of questions, and usually the questions revolve around, tell me a little bit about your experience in the lifestyle. Tell me a little bit about your previous relationships. Tell me about your previous partner. Tell me about your previous dominant. And a pseudo-sub will very often misrepresent her experience in the lifestyle and her previous relationships. She has years and years and years of being told what to do by her former dominant. The fact that she didn't actually do any of those things is totally irrelevant, of course. And it should be a huge red flag. If somebody says that they have years and years and years of experience following instructions and taking guidance and learning and training and being a good submissive, the first thing you want to ask is, why are you not like the perfect submissive at this point then? Why did that not work? where is he now? What happened to that relationship? How did that relationship fall apart? Well, usually there's a little bit of a disconnect there. Usually it's not because she was just, so good at being a submissive. So you have to kind of take those questions to their next logical level of probing, I guess. Now, I guess one other thing that you might want to look at in terms of talking to someone and to determine whether or not this person is pseudo-submissive is a pseudo-submissive always describes her former dom as being abusive. And her future dom is perfect, of course, and her current dominant is a work in progress. Now think about that for a minute. If every former dominant was abusive, that tells you a lot about this submissive. Because, let's face it, there are a lot of jerks out there, but there are also some good dominants out there. And what are the odds that every dominant that this person has had in the past or has been in a relationship in the past has turned out to be an abusive jerk? It's much more likely, if this is a consistent concern of hers, it's much more likely that she has some really bad relationship skills. And yes, skills are necessary in every relationship, and sometimes people just have really crappy relationship skills. And so, generally speaking, and you know this from your vanilla experiences as well, a woman whose every partner for her entire life has turned out somehow to be a jerk either has no clue how to pick partners or has some really crappy relationship skills herself. That's just going to be the unfortunate reality of things, all right? And of course, every future dominant is going to be absolutely perfect. The next guy is going to be the real deal. She's saving herself for that perfect white knight dominant or whatever type of dominant she particularly cares for. And really, whoever she's with right now, very, very rare that a pseudo-sub will have anything good to say about him or her. So kind of keep that in mind, too. And remember, when somebody has bad things to say about everybody else out there, guess what? Someday you're going to be one of those everybody else people. And so, in my view, somebody who doesn't have something nice to say about anybody is somebody that I really don't want to spend any time around. So maybe you can take that as a little bit of life advice from the Mr. Miyagi of BDSM. I guess that's what they're calling me now, right? Because I'm half Asian. Do I sound Asian? I sound unmedicated, I know. Okay, anyway, we are getting close to the end of our hour, and we are probably going to wrap this up by just saying that I hope that I have not offended anybody out there who considers themselves a good brat submissive. There really are some really great brat submissives. In fact, some of my favorite people are brats. And again, there's nothing wrong with being a brat as long as your bratty behavior is engaged in with the full knowledge and consent of your partners. It's only when you are bratty and being something or somebody that your partner doesn't want you to be that you have crossed the line and become not so much a brat, but a pseudo-sub, which is just another word for a phony sub. So don't let that happen to you. Don't let that happen to your friend. Friends don't let friends become pseudo-subs. We want everyone to succeed out there. We want everyone to have good and fulfilling and healthy DS relationships, if for no other reason, because it makes the world a happier place. I just want to remind you that I have a book coming out next month, The Warrior Princess Submissive. It's going to be good. I'm not almost done, but I'll have it done by next month, and I think you're going to like it. It's about a submissive type that we didn't talk about in book number 1. And that is a submissive that everyone thinks is a dominant, but really isn't. A strong, smart, capable, and loving submissive in every sense of the word. Sure, she's kind of an archetypal submissive. And she's kind of like Laura Croft, the Tomb Raider, and Wonder Woman, and Batgirl, and every strong, sexy woman you've ever heard about all wrapped up into one. And you may not match every single characteristic, but I know that there are a lot of strong, smart, capable women out there who will identify with her. So I'm really looking forward to getting this book out and getting your feedback on it. Check out Volume 1, doing really well on Amazon. That is Domination Submission, the BDSM Relationship Handbook. My name is Mike Makai, and you've been listening to DS Radio. Hope you'll be back next week. Bye-bye now.